Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about fostering a love of learning in education. And today we have a wonderful guest who has been a psychologist for 20 years, I think, with 20 years of experience working with youth. So, very perfect for the topic. Our guest today is Carlin Lee, who is currently managing a counseling team, and he also volunteers to help students who are pursuing psychology. Thank you so much for joining us today, Carlin.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on with a lot of experience in your back pocket. And I think it's going to be very fitting to ask you to share a bit more about this because, working with youth and, talking about topics like education it is important. And certainly for yourself, I think it comes from a lot of passion as well, because I know you don't just work full time in this area, you also volunteers. So I wonder how you got here and why you chose this line of work.
So just a little bit about my history. I specialize in performance psychology, where I help people in terms of improving their performance, be it in their work, be it in sports, be it in academics as well. So it's a large spectrum where this work can be applied. And where it really started was I was always wondering about how to motivate students, how students are being motivated. Because I do see students who are not able to catch up in their schoolwork, and from there, I wondered, like, what's wrong? Like, what happened in between? At the same time, I was actually studying psychology, and so I decided to pursue this area to look into the motivation of students, to look into how can I improve that part. How can I look into learning and increasing their motivation for learning? And at the same time, I was doing some sports as well. So it all came together very nicely in terms of this look into performance psychology.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool to hear. So, lots of different sort of ways for you to work with youth. And I think you're going to be sharing with us a lot of great insights today on this topic, because I think in a way you're kind of like an educator yourself, right? You've worked with a lot of different people, so not just as a psychologist, but yeah, sort of like an educator too.
Yeah, I've been in the education. I think I've been in the education system for probably the last 14, 15 years, working exclusively with students. And I do on the side, I do have some athletes that I work with as well, but majority my clients or the people that I work with are all students.
Yeah, great. So we're gonna have a great time talking about the love of learning today, because who would be better to talk about learning than someone who works with students all the time, right? Now, before we get there, let's talk a bit more about you. We have this section where we called "Have You Met Carlin?" and we're gonna get to know some of your favorite things. My first question is, what is your favorite book?
So the book, I always wondered about books, and I'm a very bad reader. I can't finish a lot of books. That's a funny thing. I fell asleep reading Harry Potter. A lot of people will scold me for that, but my wife loves books more than me. I fell asleep reading the second page of Harry Potter, and I knew that I couldn't read fictional books. So a lot of books that I read are non-fiction. So my favorite book is actually a book by another psychologist, and it's a very, very old book called On Being a Person. So it's it's a very nice book to read, and it's very introspective. But at times, because it is such an old book, and it's written in English, but it's written in like the 50s, 60s, so it's very difficult to read, and sometimes it tends to be very philosophical, but yet at the same time, it's very human. So you will go into very deep thoughts, thinking about yourself, coming back to the book, thinking about yourself, and going back and forth.
Very interesting recommendation. And I think it's quality over quantity, right? You don't have to read a lot of book, but to know some books deeply, that's also great to know. Now, that's book. I wonder if you fall asleep watching movies as well. Hopefully
Uh,
not. And if not, then what is a movie that you have been really enjoying lately?
I think one of the movies that I rarely watch movies, but one of the movies that I watched was Avatar 2 that at the theaters. I mean, I watched a lot more Netflix than going to the theaters, but I went to the theaters to watch Avatar 2, and I really like that part because I mean that interaction in that brotherhood, between the children, of the main character, and because I have siblings myself, and I do wonder about that conflict between siblings and how we grew up. And so that part, I actually connected quite deeply to the younger brother. I guess I can't remember his name, but I know that it's the younger brother who wanted to show his father that he could step up, he could do things similar to the older brother. So I thought that was a really nice movie. Yeah.
Hmm. Very interesting. Well, I actually haven't watched it myself. I know everyone has pretty much watched it now, and I haven't watched it. So now I'm gonna have to do it. Okay. Now I know a lot of our guests on the show actually don't listen to podcasts. I wonder if you do, and if you do, what is your favorite one?
I do listen to some, not a lot. A lot of podcasts that I listen to are actually put up on YouTube. So I do look at podcasts mainly regarding news, some news, local and international news, and they have some discussion about the news as well. And yeah, that's a lot of the podcasts that I watch because they do come daily. Um, so it's something, a local podcast that they call the Daily Catch Up. So it's a
Oh,
part on the
cool name.
Twitch. Yeah. So that if you didn't read the news, you can come here and you can catch up with the news.
Yeah. Oh, that's a cool concept, and I like the name as well. Very cool. So, would you have a role model at all?
Actually, when I think about role models, I do a role model. His name is Carl Rogers. He's actually the author of the book that I mentioned earlier. Because when you look into his writings, when you look into his videos, there is a lot of videos and interviews about him. He's very kind and he's very empathic. But at the same time, he's quite a great thinker. That you can actually see from his writing. He thinks a lot and very deeply in this area of humanistic psychology. So with that, that is the type of psychologist that I want to be as well, where you're kind, you're empathic, and yet you think very deeply.
Yeah, very cool, and also really consistent. The one of the only books that you remember or read, was written by your role model. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. And finally, what is a course you've completed that left a really strong impact on you?
Uh, Recently, I just finished a specialist diploma that was just finished in August. So that really helped me think about how to better engage with youth, and how I can use those skills that I learned with the youth that I volunteer with as well. Because they talk about engagement with youth, they talk about stakeholder management, they talk about group dynamics. How do you organize or facilitate group dynamics as well? So it's a very useful and inspiring kind of study that I took over a year in the last year, and I thought that was really good because now I keep thinking back, how can I use this? How can I use that? So that was really good. in terms of that learning in the last year.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. And now we've gotten to know you a bit better. Let's talk about today's topic. We're here to talk about the love of learning and our well being. And a lot of people are probably wondering why we are talking about learning when we're talking about well being. It's kind of like one is a state of being and the other is like a state of action. I do think that there's a big correlation here, though, and we'll explore that. But first of all, I would love to hear your perspective on well being because I think each person sees it very differently. And the fact that you're a psychologist means that you probably have seen this as well in a lot of different people. And that leads us to the curiosity of what it means to you personally.
So the question is about what is well-being, right? So mine is very simple. Pretty much to be with the people I love, to enjoy the food I love eating, and to be in the moment when I do the things that I love to do. Because I think those three take up a lot of time in my life, and they are quite precious, right? When you focus on the people, on the food and the things that you're doing. Yeah. So that's when I participate in all these things and with the being with these people, I think that's good well-being for me.
I love that you mentioned food. I don't think anyone has mentioned food in their definition of well being
Important.
before. And I do really love food.
Yeah.
Yeah, so important.
Yeah.
Cannot believe no one has mentioned it till now. Thank you. Such a great one. Um, and yeah, totally love that definition. So, uh, obviously, this is personal to you, but I'm sure because you've worked with a lot of different people, you sort of notice a tendency in people to, perhaps categorize well-being in certain ways or, view certain things that would contribute to their well-being, but actually that would be detrimental to them. So I wonder what would be some of the biggest misconceptions you think people have about well-being.
I guess a lot of times when I, talk to youths, because yeah, I do talk to youths a lot. They always think that well-being, when we talk about well-being, it has to be very, very positive. So yes, it's on the spectrum, but they people tend to see it at the far positive end. That when I talk about well-being, it has to be very, very, very positive, and I have to be very, very, very happy, and I need to have the best things in my life that I can have. But that's to be very, very positive, right? But that's not really about well-being. For me, well-being is really about contentment and appreciation. Yeah. So if you're contented with what you have and you appreciate what you have, actually that fills up you as a person.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a big piece of gratitude, and having gratitude in our lives, because that's true. Especially in today's society, there's this big emphasis on like keeping up with whoever it is that you see on the internet. Lots of that is because of social media, and young people get in, sort of, I think, impacted by this quite a bit. um, and there's also this need. I was talking to another guest today on another show, and she was talking about one of the teenagers that she was working with, and who was just so excited about her new phone. It's like a very big deal for teenagers, right? A new phone. But I think life is so much more than that. And I guess that's where we can cultivate this richness in our well-being in different ways, which is why today we're here to talk about learning, I guess, because when people think about well-being, they kind of think, oh, maybe like I need to have good health, lots of things that are surrounding me to bring me good health and feeling great about myself. But I have actually found that learning has been a really key factor in driving my personal well-being, and I think that makes total sense when this topic is part of the well-being science framework here. And I think from my perspective, obviously there's a lot of different ways we can learn. And I think a lot of people think that you only learn when you're a student, but not really. I think learning is a lifelong journey. That's kind of my motto. And that means, maybe our audience listening might wonder, like, I don't think I like learning that much, it's boring, but I do think we are learning on the daily, perhaps without even realizing. So what would be some of the key characteristics of the love of learning?
I think even before we talk about the characteristics, we need to probably talk about what is learning, like what you define, right? So learning may not just be from
Yeah.
books. Learning could also be through talking to a mentor or a senior person, right? It could even be through your experiences that you undergo, and through that reflection of these experiences, these conversations, this reading. That's where we start to build ourselves, and when we develop ourselves further. However, how do we reach that point, right? For me, it's really about being curious. That's the key one. I always say that my middle name is curious, but it's not. But yeah, that's a joke that I have. And being open, yeah, being open about learning. And I guess, with this, it also includes having a growth mindset, right, about yourself. And with all this being put together, that's where we are okay to learn. Yeah, we don't close doors when we start learning.
Yeah, that's so true. I think the growth mindset is a key factor in that. Actually, another thing that I noticed when you were talking about the definition of it is, when you pick things up from other people, like mentors, that's quite clear. If you choose someone to be your mentor, obviously you're going to listen to them. But I also find that you learn a lot from just talking to anyone, and you learn from perspectives. It doesn't really have to be a big conversation on a particular topic. I find that I learn so much from just talking to, a stranger. Sometimes, somebody in my building, we were just, we crossed paths like once in the lift and we talk about something. And I'm like, oh, I learned something new today. And that's great, And I think being open minded to challenging our own ideas is also that, part of that love of learning, because people might come with different perspectives and they might go, oh, interesting you say that. I would like to challenge that. And I really love those conversations more than the conversations where people actually just agree with you. But it's a learning curve to love this kind of learning, because you have to kind of put your ego aside.
So yeah, so that's why recently I think in last month, I mean, one point of learning that I often go back to is like TED Talks. There's a lot of them out there. Um, there's other kind of like I think YouTube channels that are really really good in those kind of learning as well. But recently in the last month, I'm actually watching this debate show. Um, this debate show where they come up with very controversial kind of questions, and you have a debate about it. And every time I watch it, I find it it's so interesting because you start to see both sides of the picture, exactly like what you're saying, right? You are learning about the topic, and you're learning about whether people should do different things, and the mindset of different people, looking at different perspectives and angles. And I'm a bit like I think they stopped at seven seasons. I finished the seventh season, and now I'm going backwards. Yeah.
That's really cool. Which show is that?
It's actually a Chinese it's a Chinese it's a debate show from China. You probably can look up.
Okay.
You can find it up on YouTube. It's called I Can IBB. Like the name is called I Can IBB. It's in two capital B's. I'm not sure why, but that's just the title of the debate show.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to put that on my list to look that up later. That's interesting. Definitely good for learning. Um, that's good to know. Now, we touched on the characteristics of the love of learning, and you mentioned some key factors there. But I think a lot of people, when they listen to this topic, they might kind of go, "Oh, I do love learning. I'm curious." But I think, in fact,
Please.
we have done some research, and our research team is kind of pointing out that curiosity and love of learning are actually two different character strengths, and there's a slight difference there. So, how can we notice the difference?
For me, I guess it's about the direction and the reason for learning. So we can be curious about everything like a young child, right? And then touching everything and going towards everything. But for learning, we need to know what we want to learn, and why we're learning it, right? And at the same time, I mean, there are other areas. Like last night, I was thinking, should I go on to take another graduate diploma for the January semester? And then, yeah, I was thinking about it for the last 2 weeks, whether I should learn it, because there is a lot of learning that I guess I can take out of it. But, and there is a reason why I want to learn that, or go for those modules as well. But I don't really have the time. So last night I was a bit sad that I decided that no, I'm not going to do that graduate diploma and learn from that as well. But I guess that's the two main reasons, right? What we want to learn, why we're learning it. Because without this why and what, we're just, we will not be going anywhere, right? Even when we're learning. So we're just starting at the base point forever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So curiosity is kind of like, you're kind of open to wanting to know about why things are, but it doesn't really have like a structured approach. When it comes to love of learning, it's a bit more structured, where you have the why and the how. So yeah, I really like that. I think it makes things a bit clearer, because otherwise people will think that as long as they're curious, that means they love learning. Well, I think learning is a bit more of a longer process. You need to put a lot more hard work in there. Where curiosity, you might ask a question, you know the answer, and then you move on. You don't really dig deep into the topic.
So you need to look into the why, the what, and the how as well. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Great to know. Now I'm going to have to reevaluate if I have the love of learning or curiosity. I'm going to have to think about that, because I have been considering, doing another degree or something of that sort, or a diploma in psychology. And now I don't know if that is curiosity or love of learning. So I'm going to have to, figure out after this, based on your guidance and based on that insight. Now, we talk about, the love of learning here, and this applies to both students and adults, obviously. But I think going back to, our childhood, everything is very foundational in our childhood, right? If you're in an environment where your love of learning is nurtured, then you are, highly likely to grow into adults that also love learning. Otherwise, it feels like a chore. I also know that some people were kind of deprived of education, so then they grow up to be adults that just love learning. So there are multiple ways this can play out. But I guess, the school system and the setting of education is important. And you've been working in this space for so many years, over a decade. So you obviously know about this. So what would you say to be some of the things that adults can do, and also teachers particularly can do, for students or for young people, so that they can have that love of learning?
I guess there's just one main thing, to have fun in the class, right? Because some of the best teachers that I know of, and I even learn from them, or I see them in action, they are saying that they're a little bit like an educator. They are mixing up education and entertainment at the same time, right? They have fun in the class, and the students have fun. So that's what I always try to do. I always try to have some fun in the class, have some laughing with students, and give them examples, and putting in make sure that they understand why they're doing it and how they can apply it. Let's have fun in the class, because I always say that without fun, we are not learning. So because, like you said earlier, right? Classroom is to some people, classroom is very boring. Homework is not fun, right? But why do people continue to do the things that they do, and even continue to do that, right? Like reading or doing your activities or any other things? It's just because it's fun, right? Coming back to myself,
Yeah.
when I was younger, I loved studying Mandarin. This was in my primary school and my secondary school days. I love studying Mandarin, and it's not because I was getting better grades than my classmate, but I was getting better grades because I love studying Mandarin. To the point that when I was going for my university, I nearly became a Chinese teacher. So that was that, and I decided that no, I'm going to move away from education, and I'm going to do psychology. So because when I was younger, other than what was being taught in school, I also went to study some scholastic works in terms of the Chinese, and went to study the poems, and went to study the different works in Chinese. And I think that really helped me understand Chinese, and that, that beauty of Mandarin, the Mandarin language. And that was, I think, one of my starting points, where I know that, this is something that I really love. And now, even with my children, I'm actually trying to pass down this love of Mandarin as well to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you made there, because I think if we are enjoying a certain subject, then it's more likely that we will love learning it. But I also know that it doesn't really work like this. It doesn't work the same way for all subjects, perhaps, especially for students, because each person is probably pulled towards another, direction. Maybe you love studying Mandarin for multiple reasons. It could be because a combination of, someone who was teaching you really made you realize that this language is awesome and you really want to learn more about it. And then at the same time, you have this like natural pull towards it. And I think this is where, the role of teachers are really important. They could make or break, how students go about their studies. And I do remember this as well, when I was in school. Like, I just hated history because we had to memorize everything, and the lessons were kind of the same. And obviously, history is a very serious subject. It's kind of hard to find humor in such a situation. And I think that's why the role of educators could be very challenging. It's a tough role. Even though we're saying, oh, like if you make it, entertaining, like edutainment, that sounds theoretically great. But in reality, it might be a big challenge for people that are teaching.
Yeah. So it's actually the question that I spoke about just now. It's going back to that fun part, because why do teachers continue to study, for example, history, right? It's because to them it's fun. So how can they bring
Yeah.
down, that the cultivation of fun that they had to their students as well, right? Yes, syllabus are syllabus. We need to follow
Yeah.
the syllabus, but there is that love that, especially I think like the languages and the humanities. It's tough. It's definitely tough, but the teachers teaching them, they do have that love for it. When I speak to those teachers, this was cultivated back then when they were studying this topics as well. And that's the question: how can they take this love and pass it down to the next generation by cultivating it? It's not just about reading, right? It's not just about studying, but what fun did they have, and then that they can translate for their students as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think I've mentioned that a few times on the show. I used to teach English before I actually, did my master's. And I remember it was hilarious. I was laughing when you talked about, bringing the fun into the classroom, because I think I made my student have way too much fun. And I didn't know if they were actually enjoying that. Like, I made them listen to songs, like English songs, and fill out the lyrics. So that's how they can improve their listening. And then I made a lot of different examples of like how things could be wrong, because I compared it to some examples in their native language. It's kind of like it was fun. And I really love the language. It's kind of like similar to how you love Mandarin. I really love English as a language, which is why I taught it. And it was, I think it was the best time to learn about different ways that people just cope with learning languages, because some people have this natural ability to grasp it, and others are just struggling all the time. And I think that's totally fair. They're just better at other things. But I do realize that when you said remember why you love the language, or like the subject you're teaching, and pass on that love, I think that is actually an important point, because I do remember when I explained to them why they should be studying it, they seem to be a bit more on board. It's not like they loved the learning part of it, but it was easier for them to kind of follow along with the journey. So I think that the role of the educator is important, and parents can do a lot too. Like, not to force students to study what they don't really want to study, but kind of help them by finding ways they could enjoy it. I think it is another way that adults can play their role in this learning journey. And I think we should also be mindful that not everyone loves learning the same thing. If we find that they love learning a certain topic, we should nurture that, and so they would be more pulled towards learning new things, or like learning more deeply about that particular subject.
So if we look from the psychological aspect of this, it's about that relationship, right? It's about that relationship. It's about that connection between you and your students, the parents and the teachers. The parents and the student, the children. That they cultivate that love of learning. That is why back here in Singapore, they always encourage parents to bring your kids to the library and sit there and read with your kid. Not just leave your kid there reading by themselves, but read with your kid, because that's what we're talking about. That relationship bonding that you have, that people will remember, right? It's the relationship with the subject that we are learning, as well as the relationship of the person who's teaching, right? And that would actually motivate us further. And to us, eventually, that's fun. That is that fun, that's that love in that subject that we are learning as well.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think that's a great tip for parents there, because then you can learn with your children. And we're talking about the love of learning, like this lifelong love of learning. It doesn't stop, once you have graduated from schools, or stop going to school in general. And so I think it's actually quite important to learn more a bit, learn a bit more about this, because everyone might wonder, okay, so sure, like love of learning sounds great, but why do I need it so much? Especially because we're talking about well-being.
Yep.
Why do you think it's so important for our well-being?
So I think if we look at learning, right? How do learning help us? Let's ask the other question first, the opposite question, right? Which is, how can learning harm us? Does learning bring us any bad benefits? There is nothing, right? There's no bad benefits of learning, and there's no badness. By learning, it doesn't harm us in any way. And it's all good if we love to learn. Some people choose not to learn. That's fine as well. But we do get more when we start to learn, and when we embrace that learning, even at older age, like 50s and 60s. Right. There's nothing we lose. There's always everything to gain when we start to learn as well. And it benefits our careers. It benefits our own development of ourselves, our thinking, and even that connection with others. Right. If we learn, if we read something, and we read together with people, right. And that's what we're talking about. That there is a lot of benefits, either for yourself, with others, or even for something bigger like career as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point you made. And we can also ask the question, even though you said it's fine if people don't love learning, but I think another question we can also start asking ourselves is, if I don't learn anything at all, like I stop learning altogether, I don't have that love of learning, what will my life become? You don't get your knowledge updated. You don't keep, up to date with what's happening in the world, new things that are kind of going on. I think there's a lot that we can start to think about when we think about whether I need to love learning. This is not a need per se. Like you're saying, a lot of people are like, hey, I'm fine, I don't need to learn. But I think that'll be their loss to not learn new things. It depends on what you want to learn, obviously, but still, you'll stay stagnant, I feel.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I think, like what I mentioned earlier, why do we learn? Because it's fun. So the fun component will probably decrease in the person's life if we stop learning, right? I can share an example with you. My grandmother, who is in her 90s, has, my auntie is in the 50s, my grandmother is in the 90s, and my auntie started to go cafe hopping. Bring my grandmother along, and my grandmother is enjoying herself even at her 90s, and learning about cafes and learning about different things. So that's, even with a very small thing, you can actually learn, and it starts to become very fun. if we continue to learn as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also great to note that when you find something interesting, that's how you can spark the love of learning for yourself. Like it's not just curiosity, like I want to know a bit more about this, but when you kind of turn that into a project yourself and learn more about it in a systematic way, and figure out the what, the why, and the how, you kind of have the why already because you're interested, you want to know more about it, and then you can figure out the what and the how, and that makes it even better because when we're in school, we have like you're saying, syllabus. We follow strictly what is given to us, but once you're an adult and you kind of like you're free from all of that bounds, you're free to choose what you want to learn, how you want to learn it, and what exactly you want to pick up from that journey. And I think that's kind of like it's exciting, and that requires a lot of autonomy, actually. So I think, here we're touching on something that is probably new to a lot of students because they kind of follow along this journey, and in a way, they kind of handheld a little bit because they are given homework, assignments, checkpoints. There is definitely that need for autonomy, and because they need to plan for when they do things, how they're going to do it. But I wonder from your perspective as a psychologist and someone who's worked in education for a while, what do you think the role of autonomy is when it comes to cultivating this love of learning?
So it's very interesting when we talk about psychology, we talk about autonomy, because that's one of the biggest things that we talk about when we talk about motivation as well, right? So in this theories of intrinsic motivation, there are actually three areas. Other than autonomy, we do have the feelings of competence. We do have as well as relatedness. This term called relatedness, and the feelings of autonomy. Autonomy is where we can choose to do what we want to do, right? The learning that we want to learn. But on top of that as well, we need to feel that we are competent, that what we are doing, we're actually improving as well, right? And the third one, where relatedness, is where we have people, where we are learning with people, and we are connecting, with what we are learning and connecting with people as well. So to actually foster this love of learning, or even foster this love of doing something, and from there you develop a love of learning. I think all three are important. When we want to develop this, we need to really feel good about ourselves when we are learning, right? And not being put down. A lot of times people stop learning or choose to stop learning is because they're being put down by their parents or put down by their teachers, right? So we need to really feel good when we are learning and feel that we are independent, and we are self-directed. That's where the autonomy comes in, right? That we are sure of ourselves. We are able to do what we need to do, and we can do it ourselves. And thirdly, there are people learning with us. I think with that, this three together, that's a very good a triad, and develop that love of learning as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point because learning, motivation, they kind of go very, very much hand in hand. And you kind of raised that point about, extrinsic recognition and rewards. And, that comes from people that teach, and that means, educators, that means parents, that means anyone who brings knowledge to young people. And to bring that sort of positive reward is a hard thing, and I think people are still navigating through this challenge where a lot of the times in education you get penalties for being late, or like submitting assignments late, or not following certain rules. But I have never seen like a reward system. Like there's no reward system where, like if you submit your assignment 3 days early, you're going to get an extra 10%. That would have been cool, to kind of have that to kind of counter react yeah, like if you submit your assignment late by how many, like I remember I submitted an assignment late by a few seconds, and I got, I don't remember, like 5% of my mark deducted because of that, and I was so mad. A few seconds. There was no reward for submitting early anyway. But yeah, I think that is just another thing to consider when it comes to learning, and that's extrinsic reward. But I think another thing about lifelong learning is, if we want to keep going, we really need to have something that comes from within. So here we talk about, the other end of the spectrum. There's this role of intrinsic rewards. We don't always rely on other people to give us rewards so that we learn, right? For example, if you love learning about cafes, like your family, your just yeah, you were giving that example earlier. No one is going to reward you for doing that. It's just like, it's rewarding to you, right? And that's why they kept going. And this is not something that have been, I don't think it has been nurtured in the education system, as far as I've noticed, having been a student myself, and I've worked with students as well. So how can intrinsic rewards encourage our love of learning, and how can we nurture that in more people?
So if we think about it, right, from a very young age, um, children actually want that affirmation. Children actually want that praises and encouragement from their parents, from their teachers, right? And this is where we can start that cultivation part, where we give this. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be anything, but simple praises to encourage them in terms of learning something, in terms of doing something, and from there, as the children actually grow up, or as we grow up ourselves, we learn to praise ourselves. We learn to tell ourselves, "Oh, it's a great job, man. You did this really well," and we encourage ourselves further. When we find that this is something that we love, and when we get better at it, I mentioned about the competence, right? When we get better at it, we encourage ourselves. This creates that feedback, right? And with that, we continue to develop ourselves when we give ourselves that affirmation, when we give ourselves that encouragement. And all this actually comes from a very young age. So actually for young parents, I definitely encourage you to give affirmations to your children, right? Especially if they are doing something out of the box, if they are doing something out of the norm, right? But in a good way, not something naughty or something bad, but something that you find that, wow, this is something unexpected. Just give it to them. Because from an Asian culture, sometimes we are very stingy with our praises and affirmation, but definitely give it to them, and from there, teach them how to praise themselves, teach them how to affirm themselves as well, because that from there they will start to understand. I can take care of myself. I can encourage myself, and I can push myself further when I do well as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important to have that um, ability nurtured in all of us, as early as possible, when we were students. Because I think for me, it took me so many years to realize that, like, if I learn X, Y, and Z, like whatever it is, for example, psychology, no one is rewarding me for it. And I'm okay with that. It took me a really long time to realize, it's just because I love learning it and it's rewarding to me. And that's what I need to focus on, because the knowledge is the reward in itself. And I think holding ourselves accountable is hard, but it's even harder to, look back on certain periods of times and just kind of go, oh, I wish I had learned that, or I wish I had invested a bit more time in that. And this is something that goes with the growth of each person as well. So, when we're talking about the love of learning, it's also kind of like, you're learning as you go through life, not just, learning about particular topics, but you kind of have to be open-minded about learning about different things. And everything is interrelated. So I think the role of educators, parents are very important in helping, young people to nurture this, not just students in general. Students is a very broad term, but, in young people in particular, if we can nurture this, that it'll be so much better for them in their future, right? And it's never too late to nurture the love of learning. even though we've been talking about, young people, I think even if an adult is listening to this conversation, they kind of go, oh, is it too late for me to love learning now? I don't think so. You can start, nurturing this love of learning anytime, because it's so beneficial for you for so many different aspects of your life, especially your well-being.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to look into what we are really interested in. Everybody has something, right? In your core, I believe everybody has something that you really, really want to learn about. Sometimes it might be that there was no opportunity when we were younger, or we didn't have the time. But there is always something, that, if I give you a day and you can choose to do this, you might not know anything, but you can choose to do this, and nobody is going to pass any judgment, or you can do this and learn this. I think everybody has that thing in them, what they want to learn and why they want to learn it already. So it's just a question of that, we just have to do it. We just have to move on, do it.
Yeah, great point. And just speaking of which, we've covered a bunch of theories. So let's get a bit more practical and go into our practice part, where we can actually help our audience to find out how they can actually go about it. So it's a very simple question, but also really hard. I think, what is a practice that you do personally to cultivate your love of learning?
I think for me is, as I mentioned earlier, is being open-minded towards myself and towards other people as well. Because I guess everybody has different perspectives. We meet so many people every day. There is always something that we can learn from them. Even if they are younger than us, I always feel that there is always something that we can learn from them. So, that kind of like, it's just a little bit of like a mental reminder, right? There's always something to learn, and just keep yourself open-minded. I think that is one starting point that we can use to cultivate this learning for ourselves.
I think open-minded is another topic in itself, like, and a lot of people might go, okay, but how do you mean open-minded? So what is something that they can try to kind of maybe test to see if they are open-minded? Because it can be very vague. It's not that easy to understand.
So the other day I was talking to a student about this as well, how to be open-minded. And I said, are you right-handed or left-handed? They said, I'm right-handed. I said, okay, go for lunch. I think just before lunch. And I said, go for lunch, go out, take a break, do everything with your left hand. Everything with your left hand. And then try it. It's difficult, right? And then it came back and it's like, oh, it's difficult. I can do some things, but there's a lot of things I can't do because I'm still used to my right hand. I say, yeah, it's difficult, but there will be areas that we can do, right? And there's this areas that probably we can start off. We might be used to pressing, buttons or something with our left hand. Let's start off with that and slowly develop ourselves further, and try out bit by bit as well. So we're not saying that learning is going to be easy, but it's more of, let's start with the small things that we can do. And from there, we expand ourselves further.
Interesting practice. I think that'll be challenging, but yeah, that sounds fun. I was immediately thinking about, writing with your left hand. That'll be probably the most challenging if you're right-handed, and vice versa. That's a fun thing to try. Um, who would have thought that would help you to cultivate, open-mindedness and the love of learning? And there you go. I think that's something small that we can all try. Now, we are towards the end of the conversation already, and it's about love of learning, and this topic is a very broad one. I think we can probably go on and on with different angles, especially when you go into certain subjects and types of industry, or types of topic. There are even more to discover, but because we're at the end, we're here for open mic. And I vaguely know you sort of mentioned it earlier, that your open mic would be about something quite similar to kind of build on this topic. So go for it. I wonder what it is.
Yeah, so actually, in my because part of my volunteer work, I work a lot and I support students who are doing psychology. And I tell them that there are actually three things for you to expose yourself further to this industry. For you to look into the perspective, for you to look into the perspective of a practitioner or into this industry, to open your eyes a little bit. But for you to open your eyes, you need this three things. Lens. You need the lens. Actually 3 or 4, but let's keep it 3. L is for learning, where we learn about the industry, we learn about the jobs, we even learn about ourselves, right? And E is where we experience, where we go through different experiences. We talk to people who have gone through the experiences. We do internships, we do volunteering, right? And when we go through the experiences, we also learn as well. And N is for networking, right? Where you network with people, you learn about their perspectives, you network with your mentors, you learn about how to go through this journey in a much smoother method. So yeah, so in a nutshell, to gain your perspectives, to open your eyes a little bit, we need to put in this lens that we have.
Yeah, that's a great one to remember. I think it's quite easy to keep in mind as well. LEN. Well, thank you for sharing that, and thanks again for being here. I think it's been really nice talking to someone who's experienced in both psychology and education to kind of talk about the love of learning. Definitely the sweet spot of your career, I would say. And I think there's so much more that we can explore on this topic. But going right back to one of the areas that we were discussing, it needs to come from within. And so I think it's our responsibilities to nurture this love of learning in ourselves when we realize how beneficial it is to our well-being and our lives overall. Now, before we let you go, we would love to get you to share with our audience, where they can find out more about yourself.
So I'm actually on LinkedIn. I talk to people and network a lot on LinkedIn. So if you want to look for me, just spell out my name or Google, put out my name on LinkedIn. I think I'm open. Just ask me any question or connect with me. I'm totally fine with that as well.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. And thanks again for your time here today. I hope our audience picked up a few new things. At least, for me, I definitely picked up the LEN at the end at your open mic there. That's super interesting. And I kind of have this renewed love of learning after today. So, it'd be good to, kind of do an audit of what areas I would love to learn more about, and go about doing it. It's really important as adults. And I think for our audience, if they are, interested in learning new things, this is also kind of a good reminder to say it's not going to be easy. Learning is never actually easy. Curiosity might be a little bit easier to achieve in the sense that, you can be open-minded, ask questions, but learning is a commitment. And I think for that, we should all stick with it, knowing how important it is in our lives.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.